And we call them and say, hey, look, son, I just want to let you know we're 30 minutes out. We're doing fine. We're going to be there. We just want to check in and see how things are going. Well, what did you just do? You just tipped your child that the party is now over. And so what does the child do? They turn off the music and they make the announcement that says what? Hey, mom and dad are going to be home in 30 minutes. You've got to get out. Now, how do all of these kids get out of your party or your child's party? They pour themselves into a car, right? And then they drive home. What happens? Typically when I ask this in a large audience, I'll say, what kind of injuries do these people sustain in the car accident on the way home? And somebody usually will blurt out, well, they die. They all die. No, no, no. They don't die in my examples. They all become quadriplegics. And because you said to yourself, well, I did asset protection planning. I got a $2 million umbrella policy at home. How far is your $2 million umbrella policy going to go when you just wrap 4 kids around a tree that became quadriplegics? Now, the question you may be asking yourself is, who's liable? Well, the first person that's going to be liable will typically be the car owner. Except for your friends that were over that night, your child's friends that were over that night, were the kind that didn't have a lot of money and their parents had a car that was totally uninsured. Or if it was insured, they personally don't have the money to pay off this claim. And so who are they going to look to secondarily? The homeowner. The homeowner. It's sort of like, it's like you went to a bar and were overserved and the bar gets sued. This is somewhat similar to that. And so the homeowner is going to get sued. That'd be you. And so how far is your $2 million umbrella going to go when the legal bills, when the medical bills, the first year are $1 million? And so you can see my point with teenage children. If you have them, you have a lot of liability. Now let me do one other quick example. Actually a couple. I live in Michigan where there's a lot of inland lakes and we have a lot of wave runners, right? So you got ski boats and wave runners and all those things. A very classic injury is somebody comes over to your place on the lake and they get on your wave runner. They've never driven one before. Now, of course, it's a party and they were drinking, so you let them get on your wave runner after drinking, they go out into the lake. You know what ends up happening? They end up hitting another boat. And a very classic injury in this scenario is a paralyzing injury. And so who's going to get sued? The person who served the booze and the person who owns the wave runner. That would be you. And so there are reasons to be asset protected. One last quick example, which I like to tell, which people seem to get a kick out of. Again, living in Michigan in the winter, there's not a whole lot to do. And so a lot of times we'll go snowmobiling. If you know anybody who snowmobiles, what they will tell you is snowmobiling is an excuse to go from bar to bar to bar. That's what you do. You socialize by going from bar to bar to bar, and while you're there, guess what you do? Well, you might have a few drinks. And I hate to continue to use alcohol in these examples, but it's true, and these are real world. So what happens when you drive home with somebody on the back of your snowmobile and you get into a crash and you injure the person who's sitting behind you? Who's going to get sued? You are. Now let me give you one last example that I know is going to hit home if the other ones have not. You're driving home from work. You're on the cell phone. And you decide that you need to do what when you're on the way home? You get a text message. I'm sure you've never text messaged while driving, right? Well, you get that text message. What are you doing? Are you looking while you're driving? The answer is no, you're not. And so while you're text messaging, by the way, it's a crime now in a lot of states and that will enhance your liability. You could be criminally negligent versus just being negligent, but you're texting on the way home and you get in that car crash. You are in big, big trouble. So there's lots of reasons for you to be asset protected even if you're not a professional. So hopefully I've motivated those non-professionals that are watching this to learn more about asset protection planning and to seek somebody out who can help you with that. All right, what are the keys to asset protection planning? The number one key to asset protection planning is really simple. Don't wait. Don't try to do asset protection planning after the fact. I've gotten a lot of calls over the last 10 years by somebody saying, hey, I need some help with asset protection planning. I just did this. And my answer to them is, I can certainly help you asset protect your assets against the next lawsuit, but there's nothing I'm going to be able to help you protect your assets against the past lawsuit. So key number one, do not wait. Again, hopefully this will motivate you to get going. Key number two, and this is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but actually real world, don't go cheap on your attorney. I always say there's two types of attorneys in this world you don't want to go cheap on. One is your asset protection planning attorney. The other is your divorce planning attorney. And for those of you who have been divorced, you know what I'm talking about. So don't go cheap on your asset protection attorney, and don't try to do it yourself. Don't go to a seminar and buy a do-it-yourself asset protection kit. If you screw it up yourself, guess who you have to blame? Nobody. If an attorney gives you an asset protection plan and they screw it up, at least you've got their malpractice to go after. So find a good attorney. If you can't find one, contact me, but don't go cheap on your attorney. So another obvious question, what assets should be protected? The short answer is anything of value. that you want to not lose in a lawsuit. And you can see the list on the slide here. Your home, rental properties, personal properties, IRAs, mutual funds, annuities, boats, planes, trains, whatever. If you're a doctor, sometimes your accounts receivables. Although I'm not going to cover it in this presentation, doctors be wary of people pitching asset protection plans for your accounts receivables. One of my least favorite topics in the industry. If you get pitched that, please contact me. And one thing you may be careful of is your future family inheritance. Okay? It's a terrible thing to get an inheritance from a family member, a parent, and then have that be subject to a lawsuit. I cover that in one of my books. If you're getting a big inheritance, although I don't have time to cover it in this presentation, feel free to contact me and I'll get you something on how to protect your inheritance from creditors. Retirement plans. Well, you know, we have money in our retirement plans. We used to have a lot more before the last 2 stock market crashes. Hopefully we'll have more in the upcoming years. But certainly you want to protect the money in your 401k or profit sharing plan. Well, you should know that it is federally protected under the ERISA laws. So what plans are protected? 401ks, profit sharing, money purchase, new comparability, defined benefit, and 412(e)(3) plans. These are federally protected under the ERISA laws, so those are safe. What's more problematic are the non-ERISA plans such as SEPs, or Simplified Employee Pension Plans. I frankly don't know why people use these, except for it seems that a lot of small business owners and sole proprietors use SEPs. I think they use them because their CPA thinks they're cheap and easy. I don't recommend them for tax reasons because they're not overly beneficial when you factor in the cost of the employees. But from a pure asset protection standpoint, they're not technically asset protected. So be careful. In some states they will be, but in other states they won't. You need to check with your locally trusted advisor to determine whether your SEP, if you have one, is protected. But again, if you have a SEP, I strongly recommend getting rid of it into a profit sharing plan more particularly, which is federally asset protected. Now let's talk a little bit about IRAs. Whether you're 25 watching this or 65 or 70, you may have money in an IRA. You should know that there was a federal bankruptcy case that came out back in 2005 that said IRAs are protected in bankruptcy, which is good. However, if you're not filing bankruptcy, you can't use this law to your advantage, or this case to your advantage. Now, there's about 26 states that do asset protect IRAs with their state statutes, which means there's a whole bunch that don't. And so you need to make sure that you're what state you're in, whether it protects your IRA, and if it doesn't, you want to be proactive to take steps to protect that asset. Yes, community property states. Well, look, I'm from Michigan, which is not a community property state. And if you talk to an attorney who lives in a community property state about those laws, they will almost get a snobby look on their face, like community property states from an asset or from an estate planning point of view. You know, these are superior. Community property states are superior. And while that may be debatable, what is not debatable is the asset protection features of community property states, which is just awful. At least in non-community property states, if your assets are titled in another spouse's name, well, that's not a good asset protection plan. It can have asset protection features to it. In community property states, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whose name the asset is in. In a community property state, just because your assets are in your spouse's name, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're asset protected from creditors. In fact, they probably are not. So if you live in a community property state, don't think you're doing asset protection planning by putting things in your spouse's name. Now let's talk about corporate entities. I'm going to spend quite a few minutes on this slide that you see here in front of you. I have sole proprietors, partnerships, C corporations, S corporations, LLCs, and FLPs, which stand for Family Limited Partnerships. Now, I'm just going to go over these very quickly and tell you